integration with QuickBooks, and under the agenda here, I believe it says tighter integration with QuickBooks. We're asking customers to take advantage of new tool sets to get VISCO information into QuickBooks, get QuickBooks information back into VISCO. During the last user conference, we really hadn't done much at all, frankly, with QuickBooks since we started integrating with it. And looking for Susan Force. She has left, which is probably appropriate because this wouldn't apply to her, but I think everyone else here is connected to QuickBooks on their with their account integration. I could be wrong about that. So anyway, for us, for those of you who are connected to QuickBooks, there is quite a bit, quite a few changes that have been made recently, improvements that allow us to send information into QuickBooks in a new way, and also retrieve information back out of QuickBooks, which is something that was almost, I don't want to say impossible, but we basically said during the last user conference and have for years as we supported the integration. So it's kind of a one-way thing. It's unidirectional. It's not bidirectional. For whatever reason, the excuses we may have come up with at the time, the reality is customers, the demand was too high, and customers said you need to find a way to get QuickBooks information into your system, so we're doing that. The first example, which Tim mentioned yesterday, was the ability to see outstanding receivables by customer from within the system, but they're cropping up over the last year or so. Several additional examples, particularly in the area of reporting, that really, from a technical perspective, have made the process, we're much more comfortable with the process than we were a year ago in terms of combining VISCO and QuickBooks data for reporting purposes and really for any purpose inside the system. So there's three main points that I want to talk about when it comes to this integration stuff, and one of them is a thing that over the last year or so, again, one of the points of integration that we've improved upon is the flexibility with which we can send information down to QuickBooks when it is coming from VISCO. And so we've all, at this point, recognized that the primary points of integration, the primary points when we're pushing, sending information down to QuickBooks, have always been customer add or update, vendor add or update, invoice post, sales invoice post, and what we call voucher or cost entry, posting of those items in VISCO to become bills in QuickBooks. There are variations on that, of course, like invoice, sales return post becomes a credit memo in VISCO. There are other areas where we're integrating as well. In fact, I'm trying to think of some examples that apply to customers here. I'm sure you will. If there are other areas, you know them already on. Daniel, for example, is an example. You're doing the inventory reconciliation thing on a monthly basis. So there are variations beyond that, but the four I want to touch on at first in part one of this discussion is the customer, vendor, cost, and invoice. Now with each of those, up until about a year and a half ago, the information that was sent down to QuickBooks from us, or sent over or across, however you want to look at it, into QuickBooks from VISCO was pretty static. Pretty much you got the fields you got. There was, let's say if we're looking at the customer, there was 7 or 8 fields on the customer that were being sent down to QuickBooks initially. That's probably a little bit more than that. You had the ID, or in reality it was actually the accounting key. You had the name, the address fields, phone, fax, email. I don't know the QuickBooks Store's website, you recall. Payment terms, and I believe we did send out a secondary address as well. So there's not a ton of information that either system by default stores about customers anyway. There's only 10 or 15 fields really in either system in the standard version of a customer edit screen. But as we mentioned yesterday, one of the things that we've added in 4.0 in particular is this credit limit field. You'll see at the bottom right here that's stored now in VISCO as an entry field and also passes automatically to QuickBooks. And that is an example. Well, I should say that is a somewhat unique case in that it's a new field added to both VISCO, or added to VISCO to address QuickBooks, But the point that I'm trying to make here about what we can send over is that on the customer screen, and amongst others, we'll talk about the others in a minute, is that any field now in VISCO can be sent to any location in QuickBooks, whether that's any location, I should say, any customer field in VISCO can be sent to any customer field in QuickBooks. That means any of the additional custom fields that associate with that customer, anything, characteristics that we may be tracking, customer groups rather, the things that make a customer much more interesting than just their address. In fact, I think contacts, my knowledge of how QuickBooks handles contacts isn't quite as strong as it should be. I believe there's a singular name, or do you have multiple contacts in QuickBooks, or does it depend on the version now? What is the singular? Okay, you have enterprise. So.
Never transfers to QuickBooks for us.
I will make a note of that because that is no longer should be the case. For sure. Yeah. Okay. Sales rep. Yeah. You guys don't have sales rep sending over on the customer behalf?
You check to see if it doesn't seem to be sending over.
Okay. That's another, I mean, this is why we're having these conversations. It's good. We absolutely have customers sending sales reps over. Sales rep is a strange one because, at least in our understanding of how QuickBooks handles sales reps, they need us to pass these abbreviations of sales reps. At least that's what we've seen so far in the customers where we have been sending over sales reps. They have these abbreviated versions. I don't know why. Something to do with the way it appears in documents. But so we have created this sort of background structure where all of our sales reps, traders, that are referred to in VISCO, have full names or IDs, and then they have the full names. Now we also are storing abbreviation in cases where that information needs to go to QuickBooks as well, because we actually have to pass that abbreviation into QuickBooks for them to recognize which sales rep we're talking about. But that is definitely being done, and payment terms, to speak to John's point, and also Tim brought it up, that there have been instances where we've dealt with that with customers in the past. I mean, I can't say that this is definitely the case in your instance, but it is true every field that we integrate with QuickBooks. The particulars of it, I mean, it really does require exactly the same structure, of course, and when you're mapping the field, one field to another, so that term has to already exist in QuickBooks. And it also has to be case sensitive, so capital N, ET, underscore, or space, 30.
We had that problem. What we did is we deleted everything in QuickBooks as far as terms, and we had no problems. Everything came over perfect after we did that.
Wow, that's good.
Because of that, because they weren't matching.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the traders coming over, because I have them in class field.
Right.
Same thing. Everything in QuickBooks that we did this way, we updated everything. When VISCO, it came over properly.
Okay.
And that's the problem I had.
You guys use QuickBooks Online, correct?
No, I use QuickBooks Online, I have regular QuickBooks too.
Oh, okay.
I use both the desktop.
I'm going to talk about class a little bit more as well, because I feel like that field in QuickBooks can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. We have gone through a bunch of different integrations with QuickBooks now and treated it different ways. I know that there's real value in further categorizing your transactions in QuickBooks and getting profitability reporting out of QuickBooks that might not otherwise be available. So that is something I'll touch on a bit later as well. But to go a little bit further with the customer here, the point about traders is one that I had expected to bring up as well. The credit limit I mentioned, and the payment terms, I think, in your particular case, we definitely should be looking at that. But that realistically is a field that should be transferring over at every level as well. Customer, default vendor terms, and then also the invoice and the costs. So that's just point one about this, the changes to this integration, the flexibility, the ability to then send out fields from VISCO into QuickBooks in the customer screen. Now the same concept applies to the vendor screen, as you can imagine, where we have, and to get into a little bit more of the technical details here, we have, as of, this was all 3.9 stuff actually that was done, so I believe everyone in here has this available already. If not, we'll get you on to at least 3.9, if not 4.0, as soon as possible to make sure this is the case. But this flexibility that was implemented was across the board implemented in a way that we basically said, okay, everything that we're sending over right now, we're going to continue to send over the same way. But if people want to send over things, specific fields in a way different than another customer, they're able to do so by creating these custom updates to send information in a new and unique way. And there have been one or two occasions where we realized we essentially missed something, and we added it to the standard as well. So this, like for example, the sales update, that may be an instance where I don't know for a fact if that's on the standard or not, but that is something that others are doing at this point. The vendor, I can just go through the same sort of list here on the vendor side and indicate what we're passing, what we could be passing. Again, it's fairly limitless, and my familiarity with the QuickBooks fields is good but not great. So if I'm missing something, or if you're wondering if there's a particular field in QuickBooks that does seem to have an obvious match to something in VISCO, but it's not being sent over, now is the time to discuss that, because I think there's still the ability for us to further modify our defaults here. So the accounting key it starts with that has to be, of course, an exact match with that top vendor name field in QuickBooks, and then everything else should flow on down. For example, the address, of course, phone, fax, and email again. I don't believe that, as I asked earlier, the contacts, if it's just a single contact, because we have the multiple contacts, I don't think we did anything in terms of sending down a contact. We could send down a contact for a customer or a vendor if it was relevant to keep those things in QuickBooks, and we already had them in VISCO, but we wouldn't know which one to pick because we have the ability to pick several. So, perhaps we could default with a singular. If there's only one contact, we'll take that one, or we'll always take the first one, or we'll take the one where the contact group is called QuickBooks or something like that. I mean, there's options there, but that is not currently being done. The rest of this information, again, website, manufacturer, ship from, transport days, that information I don't believe exists by default in QuickBooks. And then you can add custom fields there, and in those instances we could make some custom mapping as well, but those things aren't by default being sent down. Discount percent, I don't know, I don't think so. And payment terms should be, as I mentioned earlier, with the customer phone. So going in, also the groups, this will be different for each of you guys, but those groups could also be sent down, just as is the case with the customers. The comments, I don't know that there's a comments field for vendors and books, but if there is, or we wanted to, for example, send this down every time we had a bill for this vendor, that we put this maybe at the bottom of the bill or the memo section of the bill, we can do something like that. I haven't done anything like that yet, but that's one option. I'll get a little bit more into those details in just a minute. I mentioned the contacts, and the rest of this stuff is not terribly relevant. We don't have the ability right now to send out attached documents images, so QuickBooks it's got some functionality there, but we don't do anything with that. As we talked about yesterday, the active and inactive does have a bearing on how we send information to QuickBooks back with customers and vendors. If it's inactive, marked as inactive, we're not sending it in to QuickBooks. It is considered an inactive in VISCO. If it is active, we will send out to QuickBooks. There are potential messages you might be receiving, and in fact we see this in our support basically on a day-to-day basis, and that is in various instances where the integration is not maybe giving the most descriptive message it possibly could, but you cannot have the same vendor and customer name. You can't actually have the same vendor, or you can't have the name duplicated amongst any of the entities, whether it's an employee, another name, a vendor, or customer.